Hello, everyone. Wicked, let's talk about it. So, this movie was released in November of 2024, and y'all, it is based on everything, let me tell you. So, it's based on a play, a musical that came out in 2003 that is based on a book that came out in 1995 that was inspired by The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the book from 1900, as well as the famous movie version of that book, The Wizard of Oz, from 1939. All right, so hopefully you got all of that. And yeah, this movie when it came out this past winter, it was a pretty big deal, and I think I can see why. I certainly enjoyed it when I saw it in the theaters. I think it resonates with so many people because it's timely, right? Because we're going through quite a lot of political turmoil, to put things lightly, as we have been for several years now. And the Land of Oz has always been tied to the American story, I would say, considering it's really the first American fairy tale. And Wicked is very much an inherently political story. And that makes a lot of sense considering that the original, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, has been interpreted as a political allegory for political events in 20th century America, early 20th century America, like late 1890s, going into the turn of the century, the 1900s, when L. Frank Baum wrote the original book. And I won't get deep into that, but suffice it to say, the Wizard of Oz, the book, is said to be an allegory for debates over monetary policy in early 20th century America. In other words, gold versus silver, and which standard should we be using. And of course, Dorothy in the book, she wears silver shoes, as we see in Wicked, and she goes down the road of gold to the city of green, made of money, and what have you. But there are also other angles to the original Wizard of Oz story. The author, L. Frank Baum, his mother-in-law was a suffragette, and if you don't know what that means, she advocated for a woman's right to vote, which women didn't have in this country until, 100 years ago. So, yeah, he has ties to that movement. And he also had some opinions about Native Americans. And they were, frankly, not good because he wanted them to be eradicated, basically. But he expresses that in his writings, but it has been argued that he was being ironic and he really meant that they should not be eradicated, but the consensus is L. Frank Baum was not a friend to the Native Americans. Although it is interesting because some people have interpreted the flying monkeys as representative of Native Americans because they were sort of taken from their natural home and put to use in this movie by a corrupt leader, and they were also put to use, enslaved, honestly, by the Wicked Witch in the original book. So there's an interpretation, and in terms of the women's suffragette movement, Dorothy in the book is a very strong female character. And of course, Oz is basically ruled by women, right? The four witches in the four quadrants of the land. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that for some context and some background. Wicked is quite the political story, and that goes back to the very beginning with The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900. So, Wicked has a lot of symbols in it. I'm not going to dwell on them here because if you're in the online class, you have the discussion board where I want y'all to sort of hash out what you think these symbols mean in terms of how they relate to the message of the movie. And I had a really hard time picking just four because I think four suffices for discussion, because there are a lot of symbols, and these, I think, are the most significant to the film's message, and I will come back to these as I move through the PowerPoint. But yes, I think these, her hat, her broom, the poppies, and the grimoire are probably the most important. So I wanted to talk about the characters as a vehicle for talking about the themes of this movie so we can get to the message of it. So let's talk about Elphaba. Her name actually comes from the author of the original Wizard of Oz book, L. Frank Baum, Elphaba, L. Frank Baum, which I think is interesting considering, she's a strong woman, of course, and L. Frank Baum, he knew a lot of strong women in his life, having a mother-in-law who was a suffragette. And I think even if his view on Native Americans was problematic, he definitely was all for women's rights and what have you. So that's interesting. And of course, like women back in the early 1900s and, still today, in some areas of life, Elphaba goes through a struggle. She is othered for her green skin. And othering, if you don't know what it means, it's basically a word that just means to make someone into the other. You are not like us. You're something other than us. And we see that happen when she first arrives at Shiz, and even from her birth, her father calls her it. He dehumanizes her. Take it away. That is so rough for poor Elphaba, isn't it? But she's strong, isn't she? She always stands up for herself. And she tries to make her skin color not a big deal. And with varying results. And we can see how she can sympathize with the animals in Oz who are being persecuted. She was raised by animals. She was raised by Dulcibert, if you recall, because her father didn't really want much, if anything, to do with her. And she also sympathizes a lot with Dr. Dillamond when she sees how he's treated at Shiz. And she wants her skin condition, her skin color, cured, quote unquote, by the wizard at first, but she learns that it's just part of who she is, and it doesn't mean she's bad, even though people would tell her otherwise. And, I think she learns that by witnessing the persecution of Dr. Dillamond and learning about the plight of the animals in Oz. So, yeah. And when she learns that the wizard means to exploit her because she has magic and he doesn't, that's when she realizes, I am special. Well, she doesn't have a big head about it, but she realizes I am capable, and strong, even though people would tell me I'm not because of my skin color. And the fact that the wizard wants to exploit her just sort of shows her, hey, I am a strong, talented, powerful woman, and if he wants to use me, of course, that's all true. So she realizes it's not right that she's being used while simultaneously being othered. And that's when she breaks free, right? And then, of course, she's called wicked because she goes against the station that the wizard and Morrible want for her. Because she realizes she's more than just an object to be used. She should not be an object to be used because she is her own person. And she very much is the foil to her roommate, Galinda, / Glinda, or whatever you want to call her. Glinda is pretty much the epitome of conformity. She is everything that everyone around her at Shiz is. She is beautiful, she's perky, she's popular, and she's conventionally feminine, all the things that Elphaba is not. She's also that's not to say that she isn't strong in some regards. She does stand up for herself when she has to, especially at the wizard's palace when the guards are coming after them. But nonetheless, she is quite shallow throughout the movie and concerned with appearances, and appearances only, because she really doesn't have any real skills or talent. At least when she was in school, she never performs magic. I don't know if you noticed in the main part of the movie when they're at Shiz. And she only gives the appearance of caring about Dr. Dillamond when she changes her name from Galinda to Glinda to honor him, quote unquote, because that's how he pronounced her name. But that isn't really doing anything to help him, is it? That isn't doing anything to solve the plight of the poor persecuted animals. So she very much is just someone who puts on a show. You know, it's not about aptitude, it's the way you're viewed, as she says in her song, Popular. So, yeah. And that might be why she trusts the wizard, because the wizard also is all about appearances instead of being genuine, or real, I should say. The wizard is very fake. He doesn't have any real magic, of course. All of that said, Glinda is very flawed in a lot of areas, but nonetheless, she still cares about Elphaba. Because she gives her, the hat, which at first seems to be a slight, but ends up becoming a symbol of their friendship because it helps them bond. At the Ozdust Ball, and she also gives Elphaba her cape at the end, and then she flies triumphantly away. So yeah, she still cares about Elphaba, definitely, even though she doesn't really stand up for the society that persecutes her, which is unfortunate. Alright, so that takes me to people / animals in the society that can be quite oppressive. The Land of Oz in this movie. So we have here Dr. Dillamond. He's one of the last animal professors at Shiz. And I wanted to note that Shiz, I think, is some sort of combination of the word shit and Oz, because Oz is shit, isn't it? And I think that, I don't know if that was on purpose, but that was what I interpreted the name as. What else could it be? But anyway, yeah, Shiz sort of serves as a microcosm of the Land of Oz. In other words, what happens at Shiz is symbolic of what happens through the whole land. Building off of that, Madame Morrible, she is the head, basically, of Shiz. I don't think she's the headmistress in this version, at least, but she's undeniably powerful at the school, just as the wizard is in the Emerald City over all of Oz, at least in the sense of he's in charge. He doesn't have any real power, obviously. But anyway, we have two corrupt leaders at the school and over the whole land. So, something about Dr. Dillamond, I don't think it's any accident that he's a goat. I don't know if y'all have heard this term before, but there's a word called scapegoat, which basically means you find someone to blame for problems that are happening, and you put all the blame on them, just as they say in the movie, in that first classroom scene, because there was the drought, and the animals were blamed. That is called scapegoating, when you blame someone else for a problem, usually like a whole group of people who aren't really the source of the problem. And I think it's interesting that Glinda puts him down for being unable to recognize, being unable to pronounce her name. And that is so rich, isn't it? Because Glinda has a weird way of talking herself, doesn't she? She and many of the other Ozians use these weird words like scandalous and hideous and all these nonsense words and pronounceify. And in the first classroom scene with Dr. Dillamond, Elphaba says, maybe the pronunciation of your name isn't his main concern in life. And I think that's interesting because Elphaba, as a character, she usually doesn't use those made-up words, but she does in that case. Almost like she's pointing out how ridiculous a double standard it is. It's like, you're judging this goat for the way he talks, but you talk all ridiculous, you see? So, yes, quite unfair. And I also wanted to talk about Nessarose. So, spoiler if you weren't catching on, but she is the future Wicked Witch of the East. She is Elphaba's sister, right? And like Elphaba, she is disadvantaged. And I wouldn't say she's necessarily othered in the way Elphaba is, but she still is different in the sense that she has a wheelchair, and I've got to say, I don't think I saw anyone else in a wheelchair at Shiz University. Unlike Elphaba, though, she's accepted, quote-unquote, because she's seen as tragically beautiful. Whereas Elphaba, I suppose, is seen as ugly or unprepossessing, as Glinda puts it. But even if she does get more acceptance, quote-unquote, than her sister, she still suffers from the prejudice that a lot of disabled people in the real world suffer from or are subject to. Everyone thinks she's a charity case at first, and they try to help her when she doesn't need any help, and that's how Elphaba's powers get revealed. Is she's like, no, stop, don't try to help her, she doesn't need anybody's help, she's perfectly capable on her own. So she's one of the first people that Elphaba stands up for, and then Elphaba stands up for the animals as well. So that's what I would say about Nessarose. Oh gosh, I hate this guy. So let's talk about the wizard, not Jeff Goldblum. He is a national treasure. But the wizard, the character, He is pretty bad. It is said at the beginning of the movie that he grants your heart's desire if you meet him. And what's fascinating to me is he says in his song that he always wanted to be a father. And he wants to treat the citizens of Oz like his children. Isn't that great? But, and you know, Elphaba might see him as a father figure because her own father, you know, sort of wrote her off, called her it, and blamed her for his wife's death and for Nessaros's disability. And yeah, so of course he would be the father that she never had. But it's really tragic and horrible because he isn't really a loving father. He just wants to use Elphaba. He doesn't really care about her as a person. And when Elphaba realizes that, she gives up the whole notion that she needs to change her skin, and she doesn't want that from him anymore. And he says this line, he thinks everyone deserves the chance to fly, and he has that little miniature of Elphaba that he puts in the hot air balloon, which of course is how he flies, because he doesn't have magic or anything. He says everyone deserves the chance to fly, but he wants you to fly in a specific way. He wants you to fly the way he does, right? He puts that little figure of Elphaba in the hot air balloon. And yeah, not everyone, the way he flies is bad because he flies down into Oz and takes over, right? And he thinks he's helping by scapegoating all of the animals, but actually he's just creating a more divided and oppressive society. And yeah, in response to that, Elphaba gives her own version of flying with her broom, and she allows herself and also the monkeys to fly away. And they fly away in the way that the wizard did not want. He didn't want them to be free. He wanted them to fly in service of him. But of course, Elphaba wasn't having that. She is against being exploited, right? Alright guys, so you might be asking, but what is the message of this movie? So, of course, the message is that scapegoating is wrong, that blaming other people for society's problems and making them into an oppressed group is bad. You also, in general, shouldn't other people. You shouldn't say, you're different, therefore you are bad. Or you're different, therefore you can be exploited, etc. So the movie is all about personal freedom. It's all about liberation, etc. It's all about a fair and just society that we all should live in. And I think the movie also plays a lot with the idea of wickedness. There's that question at the very beginning of is wickedness something people are born with, or is it thrust upon them? And in other words, are people born evil, or do they become evil because of things that happen to them? I think it's interesting in this case because Elphaba at the end of this movie, she is called wicked. She literally has wickedness thrust upon her, but she isn't actually wicked. She's only wicked because she's called that, and it's perceived that she's wicked because she goes against her oppressive society that would put her down or exploit her, or would put down the animals and exploit them. And they literally try to exploit the monkeys by having them work for the wizard, right? So yeah, I think that is clearly the message here. And I just wanted to end with, I think that's very significant to what we're living through today here in the United States. I talked about at the beginning how the Land of Oz has always had a connection to America. The Wizard of Oz was the first truly American fairy tale. And the Wizard, of course, if you know anything about the Wizard of Oz, he's from the United States. He comes to Oz from the United States. And he says that where he's from, a common enemy brings people together. And I think that resonates today, especially considering we are going through issues of certain people being othered and scapegoated, frankly, in our country today. Be that people like immigrants or gender diverse people or what have you. Some people might say that they're blamed for a lot of our problems, and some people might say that they aren't the cause of the problems, and some people might disagree, of course, but I think we can all agree that the movie very much reflects the landscape we find ourselves in here in 2025 in the United States. And I think that's why it's such a timely story, and I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people. And it's just a good story. It's a story of discovering oneself and learning to love oneself and standing up for what is right. Alright guys, that's what I would say on Wicked. I hope that gave you some good ideas if you plan to write about it. I'll see y'all next time.
Please comment the answers to or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. Who is Elphaba named after, and how might this be significant to her character? 2. What does the word scapegoat mean? How does this relate to what happens in the film? 3. What does othering mean? Who is a character who experiences othering in the film,